All right. All right, so I hope everybody is in the right place. I hope you chose the right Zoom presentation here, but we can go ahead and get started. Again, hopefully we don't have too many stragglers coming in left, but I expect about an hour of presentation time and then questions afterwards. But hi, everybody, welcome. My name is Holly Anderson, and I am the Research and Advocacy Coordinator for the Front Range Nesting Bald Eagle Studies. And huge thanks for all of you for taking the time to be here with us tonight. We're really excited to share the information that we've been pulling together for this and, just for the research we've been doing in general. And I would just like to thank Dana, too, for all of his help in organizing this event. And really our goal for this presentation is to highlight some of our organization's study results and information, and we hope that you will take away some new and enlightening information about the nesting bald eagle population that we have here in the northern Colorado Front Range. So a little bit about our organization before we get started. So we are comprised largely of a dedicated team of experienced volunteers and a small staff that care immensely about wildlife in our area, in our state. Um, the principal focus of our organization is research, and our goal is to publish our studies in peer-reviewed journals. And we do depend heavily on the research that we do as a foundation for the advocacy work that we do both locally and for the state. Um, so we have recently submitted or completed 2 manuscripts for journal submission, and the first of which covers 87 bald eagle nests that we have in the Front Range, and the second is on studies regarding human disturbance of nesting eagles in Boulder County. Right now, we are in the final stages of completing a final manuscript on post-fledging dependence period for 27 juveniles that we've been studying for the past 5 years. That being said, so this is just kind of showing the extent of our entire study area in the Front Range. And this whole area does measure about 20,000 square kilometers. Um, our recent journal that we submitted about the 87 bald eagle nest here, this was pretty much the focus of, or the area in which that was taking place. And the smaller study area that you see here in the brown is about 1,000 square kilometers, and it's where we focus our detailed field studies, and that could be for as many as 11 nests and 5 winter communal roosts. Now, looking in that brown area a little bit more closely, this shows the locations of our 8 most intensively studied nests in the field. And the circles that you see here in black are 5 nests that they've studied and detailed since 2017 for the post-fledged dependent studies. On those 27 juvenile fledglings, I think Dana's going to touch more a little bit about the post-fledged dependents, or PFD, later on in the presentation. But on the right are what we call nest territories for 3 of those nests. But we'll get back to that a little bit later on how we define those nest territories in just a little bit. So I wanted to throw this in here too. This is looking at the percent of population growth in Colorado, and this is from 2010 to 2020. And it's showing the location of our larger study areas. So for that map, the first map that I showed you, it encompasses this whole area here. And it happens to be coincident with 5 of the fastest growing counties in the state, and that's what you're seeing here in the gray. So what we define as a nest territory is about 4 square kilometers, and for reference, that's about 720 football fields. So you can see how the preservation of this expansive habitat here, with such explosive human development in all these counties, will only continue to be a challenge, especially for these bald eagles. So a little bit about our methods of how we go about these studies. We do follow a protocol or methodology really to gather baseline data on nesting and roosting eagles. And we utilize this protocol to document all aspects of behavior, perch usage, flights, and changes over time. And this protocol is a timer prompted, quantitative, and objective methodology where every 3 minutes we do record perch locations of the eagles multiple aspects of their behavior, including aggressive interactions and prey retrieval, et cetera, things like that. So we did throw in this table here so you can see just two of the things that we record when we're out in the field. We have behavior code 1, which if we're looking at perches, how far away are they from the nest? If they're flying, what's that flight status? Are they outside of the territory? Are they just flying to another perch? Things like that. And then behavior 2, if they're perched, are they just alert? Are they preening, feeding, and things like that? And we rely on these quantitative data to compare all aspects of behavior over time. And these data can be particularly useful. Did you have a question, Nestor? A quick question? Okay, we'll continue. Particularly useful for comparing changes over time related to anthropogenic activity or human disturbance. But before we take a look at how we utilize this methodology, let's first take a look at what has been the main and most used method to document wildlife disturbance, and that is by recording instantaneous or flush reactions. Okay, so here I just want to briefly describe how we've used instantaneous or flush reactions to document human disturbances. And this is what we call the CR 16.5 nest territory. And we're looking at it in the PFD period of 2020 and 2021. So here the red circle is denoting an area, a half-mile radius, with a half-mile radius around the CR16 nest, which is in the center here. And the graph is on the right is showing the number of flush reactions that we've seen, flush reactions being what we've seen on the vertical axis, and flush distance from the nest, varies between 0.15 to 0.4 miles from that nest. And these reactions were largely related to individuals traveling by foot or by car. And when flushed, these eagles typically circled the area, and they were generally unsettled for a good amount of time until the individuals left the area. Now, however, immediate or flush reactions can tell us little to nothing if the eagles stop using an area or if their behavior or spatial usage is unlike that observed during background, baseline, or previous conditions. So here we're going to focus on the Stearns nesting bald eagles to give an example of how our quantitative approach can be used to examine behavioral changes over time versus immediate reactions like I just described. Okay, so this is a map showing a large part of the Stearns Lake nest territory where the eagles spend most of their time. As you can see here, the mapped perches are what we're seeing with the light blue and the dark blue. So all of these in here and all of these perches outside of this red line as well. Notable perches, you see the nest up here is a star and it's circled with this yellow circle here. Perch E is a notable perch. It's pretty commonly used. It's really close to the nest tree. During the post-fledged dependence period this year, we saw a lot of use of these other, what we call the cutoff perches, especially CA, and then perch F is also, in this area in general, is also a notable area for these birds. But here we used our comparative study methods to examine behavior and perch usage over an extended period of time. When this 800-meter long trail in green was closed, so this is the trail I'm referring to right now. So we have it listed as a cutoff trail. Boulder County Parks and Open Space call it the Cradleboard Trail. But we looked at it for when it was closed last October and then all the way up to a 21-day period after it was opened on August 6th in 2022. But as you can see, this trail bisects many of these utilized perches, coming as near as 30 meters to some of them and only 80 meters from the nest tree. And the trail was opened when one juvenile was still around and it was still being tended to and fed by both parents. And this particular nest had 3 juveniles this year, 2 of which had dispersed prior to this opening. Over the 3-week time period between the opening and until August 23rd. Our comparative data show that the eagles no longer spent any time at perches they previously used, and that includes all the light blue perches that you see in here, which are the ones that fall closest to the trail. And the day after the trail opened, we stopped seeing the remaining juvenile eagle, and both adults perch usage in their territory became confined really to these two areas here up in the nest tree and around perch F. So since the opening of the trail until August 23rd, we observed 260 users on this trail in the 50 hours of observation that were conducted. And we documented 60 instantaneous flush reactions in those 17 days. And this is just a photo that I took, and this wasn't really uncommon, unfortunately. Once that trail opened up, a lot of visitors would stop and take a picture of the eagles in their nest tree. And again, this is less than 80 meters from the nest is where this trail is falling. So using both our comparative and quantitative methodology allowed us to show the reason why both methods of documenting disturbance are so important to implement. And so let me just really quick. So looking at these graphs here, this is from when the trail closed in October of 21 up until fledged in June of 2022. So for the most part, you can see the female and the male were spending most of their time in the nest tree. And, there's some usage here in the cutoff perches, not a whole lot, and then very little use at perch F. Now, once the eaglets hatched until they fledged in June, do see a little bit of a change. Still the female spending most of her time, over 70%, in the nest tree. Male still there a good amount of time, but he's also starting to use more of these cutoff perches, but still very little perch usage in F. Once the juvenile started to fledge and until the trail opened in August, really we start to see the juveniles, they're starting to move around a whole lot. And so we're seeing the female kind of also move around a lot in response to that. And so we're starting to see the female a whole lot more at these cutoff perches. Perch E, she spent a lot of time at perch CA. Still a little use at perch F, but the male was spending a little bit more time there at the time. However, once the trail opened until August 23rd, you see the use of these cutoff perches drastically decreases. And you can see the adults are really only spending their time in the nest tree or at perch F, again, outside of that cutoff trail zone in red. So what these graphs show us is that both adults stopped using the 22-acre area of the cutoff trail perches that we outlined in red in the previous slide after that trail opened. So this just goes to show an approach at only looking at instantaneous reactions can't tell a whole story relative to disturbance and displacement from important territorial perches. So it's critical to capture those changes that occur over longer periods of time, as we did in this study. And it's also important to note this specific pair of eagles has been displaced from their habitat at least 2 other times in the past, moving their nest a half mile to this area after repeated disturbances from construction in the area. Here's another example at Stearns Lake where human encroachment has impacted these nesting eagles. The area in the photo is where visitors have been allowed unrestricted access via social trail to a key riparian and fishing area that is less than a quarter mile from the nest. And this important habitat remains open to visitors even though nearly 60% of the lake margin is already open to fishing. So this photo is showing the Stearns eagles during that PFD period in 2022. The male here on the right has provided 2 fish for the 3 fledglings and the female. And this was even on a quiet day where there were no other visitors on the lake. Let's see. Right, and this photo is in that same riparian area just 2 days prior to the previous photo. And in nearly 500 hours of study, we documented that the Stearns eagles rarely use this riparian area, and when they did, it was really only when visitor use in that lake area was low or non-existent. So thus, critical fishing opportunities like the one shown in the previous photo are being interfered with in this key habitat area. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, as we mentioned in the event description, we wanted to share some insights on how our bald eagle population in the northern Colorado Front Range compares with populations in drier climates like Arizona, which is what you see here on the left, and wetter, more verdant areas like Chesapeake Bay or Florida, what you're seeing here on the right. And then our nest example is here in the middle. So right off the bat, though, you can see, just looking at these photos, you can see some notable differences in these nesting areas. But what does the data tell us? So let's first take a look at the precipitation and how it varies with respect to different bald eagle populations. So we already know that the more verdant areas are going to receive more precipitation annually, but just how much more compared to what we see in the Front Range. So looking here, the northern Colorado Front Range on average is seeing about 15 inches of precipitation annually. Very similar to what we're seeing in Arizona at about 13 inches annually. And then if you just look at northern Colorado and Wyoming, it's around 14 inches annually. More verdant areas, or those that are resource rich, wetter, receive about 32 to 60 inches annually. And that's up to 2 to 4 times more precipitation than what we see here. So these are all kind of considered the more verdant areas. Let's see. Okay. And one of the best ways to evaluate a population of nesting bald eagles and their available resources is to examine nearest nest distances. So studies examining nearest nest distances have found that population densities and nearest nest distances are related to the supply of food and other available resources in the nesting area. Thus, the greater the supply of resources, then the lower the nearest nest distances, which makes sense. More nests can be supported in a smaller area if there's an abundance of resources. So looking at this box plot here, the X's that you're seeing are representing the averages. Your horizontal midline are your medians, and then you kind of have your upper and lower limits with these bars here for each of these populations. We did break up the Front Range into 3 different sections, kind of based off that first map that I showed. I didn't really talk too much about the 68 nests, but within that rectangle, that's where we had that Midwestern field area in the brown. And then we also had that larger rectangle off to the right, which was showing that northeast area. So we did break up all 3 of those out, so you can see them right here. But to sum this up, the average nearest nest distances for these 3 Front Range areas, varied from 5 to about 7 kilometers. And all of those are at least 2.8 to 4 times greater than the average nearest nest distances from the 4 populations in wetter climatic regions, which is what you're seeing down here. All of these averages are less than 2, so these distances are relatively small and they're closer together. And our populations are more closely related as far as nearest nest distances to what you're seeing in Arizona, and they're at about 7.86. And the higher nearest nest distances for the Front Range in Arizona are likely attributed to the shorter supply of food, nest sites, and other just resources. In addition, it's just important to note too, the nesting populations in the more verdant areas host 7 to 12 times the number of nests than those found in Colorado. And so speaking of other available resources though in the area, I wanted to note the primary nest substrate for eagles in this area, and those are old growth cottonwoods. So old growth cottonwoods are extremely large, and they have proportionally large branches that can provide basically the best available tree in the Front Range to support large, heavy nests. And some of these can exceed 1,000 pounds pretty easily. Unfortunately, because they're old growth cottonwoods, they're also near the end of their life, and they're usually pretty fragile compared to some more hardwood nest trees that you might find elsewhere. So this is a map showing a study of old growth cottonwoods at Stearns Lake again. And as you can see, there are very few trees that are highly suitable to build a nest on, as opposed to the many that you're seeing that are have low suitability. Let's see. This scenario is unfortunately not uncommon in the Front Range, and like prairie resources, the limited abundance of suitable old growth cottonwoods also contributes to the highest nearest nest distances that we see here. Um, I mean, because they are nest resources as well. So here we're looking at the 2017 to 2020 success rates of nests in the main area. We did break it out by year. Same thing with Arizona. But the average success rate for the nest in the Front Range was about 62%. And this average success rate in the particular low that we saw in 2018, which is 52%, is notably lower than in populations from wetter regions in the country. Success rates in the main Northern Colorado Front Range study area are more similar to those that we're seeing in Arizona, as you can see here, which average about 55%. But lower success rates in the Front Range are likely directly related to the susceptibility of those old growth cottonwoods, along with nests and nestlings in the unfortunate punishing windstorms that we have here pretty frequently. And a variety of factors can contribute to nest failure on any given year in Arizona nests, and these may result in lower success rates. And these could include heavy spring winds that blow nests or entire nest trees down, major flooding events, excessive heat, and early May snowstorms at some of those higher elevations.
Louisiana.
So this just shows an example of a nest that had fallen at what we call the Erie nest. And due to a lack of suitable nest trees in that particular area, these eagles chose to nest on a nearly dead tree, and the limb supporting the nest fell after a long period of wet snow and these winds, resulting in the loss of 2 eaglets that were unfortunately very near fledging at the time. So let's take a look at other research we are doing. So we'll go back to the nest territories and how we define a nest territory and how that's accomplished by mapping of perches and constrained by the distance of aggressive interactions. So going back to this slide, 3 nest territories are shown on the right. So we have the Boulder Creek territory up here, the CR 16.5 territory, and the Erie territory down here. These are again from our PFD studies, but our territories are defined by fitting a tight line around our mapped perch locations. And so the perch locations are shown in these different colors that you see here. Now, what you might see if you look a little bit closer is that some of these mapped perches do lie outside of these lines. And we call this, the near nest boundaries. But some of these perches fall outside of those lines because we've added an additional constraint to our near nest area definition. And so we limit the included perches at a maximum distance of 2 kilometers from the nest or near the maximum defended distance against other bald eagles. So I do want to get into more about what is meant by the maximum distance defended against other bald eagles, but I first wanted to show you, the Stearns eagle, male eagle doing just that. So this is about 700 meters from the nest at Stearns, but you can see he's defending his territory against an immature bald eagle. And again, the same eagle, but it's just beautiful photos to share. So if you think about it, most nest territories not only offer good habitat for nesting bald eagles, but also to other raptors. So some of the nest areas with the richest resources that we have here are being used by other raptors, and so it's very common for us to have interactions with these other birds, including other bald eagles. So this slide shows a compilation of aggressive interactions that we've seen between territorial bald eagles and other raptors at the 5 PFD nests. And there have been, we summarized 428 aggressive interactions. And as might be predicted, the most frequent interactions that we've seen are with red-tailed hawks, which is what we're seeing here in red, other bald eagles here in the brown, and then at our two nests adjacent to waterways, we'll see a lot of interactions with the ospreys. And so these box plots are summarizing territorial defense against other bald eagles at these nests. And again, the average here is noted by the X. And so for the most part, the average for all these nests, and we combined it over here, they're defending their territory against other bald eagles only between 500 and 1,000 meters from the nest on average. There are some occasions, like at Stearns, which you might see the territory being defended at higher distances, like closer to about 2250. But still, that's not a whole lot. They're not going way far out of their way to defend this distance. And so from these, that's how we ended up choosing the 2 kilometers as the near maximum distance to constrain for these near nest territory limits. All right, and here in the next slide, we have what are called the Boulder Creek pair defending one of their perches, chasing an immature bald eagle away. This is about 1 kilometer from their nest. And here they are with their vocalizing goodbye. So looking back at this slide, though, let's take a look at the ferruginous hawk interactions. And so that's what we're seeing here in the pink, some at Erie, some at Stearns, and some at CR16. Across the board, the interactions are very few in number. And even though there are some winter ferruginous hawk residents that stay in these bald eagle nesting territories. So while we continue to hear upset from some land managers about bald eagles making life hard on ferruginous hawks, the numbers speak otherwise, and their interactions with eagles is almost negligible to what we saw with other bald eagles and red-tailed hawks. And just the fact alone that some ferruginous hawks establish wintering territories in 4 of our nesting bald eagle territories is important to note. All right, so moving on, I'm going to talk about what we've learned about the adults and how they spend their time throughout the rest of the year. So this slide is a summary of data from our 5 PFD nests, and it examines the presence of at least one territorial adult during our session time in their near nest territory. So as you can see, except for what we're seeing in July, adult territorial presence exceeds 60% of the time through pretty much throughout the whole year, even after the fledglings have dispersed right in this area here, clear up until even incubation. They're there almost 95% of the time. There's at least one adult there. So within the near nest territorial boundaries, for each month of the year, we have been able to derive a lion's share of information of what these eagles are doing, especially about their behavior, their requisite resources, and interactions with human activity and development. And so taking the last slide and breaking it down even more, this is looking at kind of the breakdown between the females and the males, and if there's at least one adult. So the gray, sometimes they're far away, you can't tell who is who, and that's what the gray is accounting for. And here the horizontal midline that you're seeing for these is representing the average. But overall, you see the trend that the female is usually around. We've seen the female around throughout the year a little bit more on average than what we see with the male. But for the most part, again, we are seeing both of them around in these territories. And after all this nest talk, I really like this photo, but I just wanted to throw in this photo of a very attentive parent here, and then the 3 juveniles. And next, let's take a look at prey. So prey for these territorial bald eagles in the Front Range is mostly dominated by fish and black-tailed prairie dogs. And so here's a photo of the Stearns family in 2018. You see the male is bringing in a prairie dog for the family. And so what we've kind of pulled together, so this is a breakdown of prey deprivation for 7 nest sites from field and nest camera observations. Generally, bald eagles do prefer to eat fish. However, they are so-called opportunistic predators, and so usually their diet will actually reflect what's available in their local habitat, which is what you can kind of see that breakdown here. And this is how we classified those nests based on what we actually saw in the field. So these 3 nests have a higher prairie dog to fish predation. These ones, you see a little bit more fish to prairie dog predation, and then Stanley Lake is kind of in the middle. It's broken out pretty evenly among prey sources. Okay, let me just. Okay. So now that we have the breakdown of prey for these 7 nests, what is happening with the rest of the northern Colorado Front Range? So we wanted to figure that out. It's gonna go. There we go. So based on the results from our prey studies and the fact that fish and prairie dogs were the dominant prey source for those nest territories that we had studied, we designed a nest classification scheme using a linear regression model to first predict the ratio of prairie dogs to fish predation, and second, to indicate, out of 4 main resource habitats, what resource the fish and the prairie dogs were derived from. So with our prey studies already completed, our first step in doing this was to map what we considered to be the 4 main resources in all these territories that provide fish and prairie dogs. So the 4 main resources we came up with were water bodies, which includes lakes and reservoirs, rivers and streams, prairie dog colonies, and quarry ponds. So as shown on this slide as an example, we mapped the aerial proportion of each of these 4 main resources in all 87 territories with the theoretical confines of a 4.5 square kilometer territory. And we assigned the theoretical nest territory size based on a near maximum limit from our territories. The ones that in our field studies do range between 2.4 to 4.8 square kilometers. And so that's kind of how we decided on this 4.5 theoretical territory. And so looking at this map here, this white line, this white circle, that's showing the overall, that's the territory, the theoretical 4.5 square kilometer territory. And then we've mapped water bodies here in blue. Any river or stream is showed in pink here. Any prairie dog colonies were mapped in this kind of coral color, and then quarry ponds were down here in the green. So we reasoned that a linear regression model would provide a baseline for classification based on the 2 main prey types, prairie dogs and fish. And using what we know about the prey based on that 7 nest study, so that being said, we acknowledge that no model is really robust enough with the sample size that we had to be considered statistically significant, but we reasoned that a linear regression would at least provide a good baseline for our classification system. So in this slide, you can see we do have our 8 classification groupings here that were derived from the 87 nests. Each classification grouping first tells us the overall predicted predation ratio of prairie dogs to fish. The prairie dog dominant classifications are noted in these warmer colors here, including mixed. And the secondly, this is telling us some important information on what resource habitat that the fish are mainly derived from. So again, either the river, water body, or quarry pond. So looking at the predicted prairie dog to fish ratio over here, you can see definitely the ones that are classified as fish, they have a very low prairie dog to fish ratio. Mixed, technically, prairie dogs are the dominant, but this is a very complicated classification system. So I won't go into that too much. But one important thing to note is the resource limited classification. And so in the model, resource limited kind of showed up being artificially elevated. But looking at these actual territories that are resource limited, you can see that they're actually hungry for resources. So there's not a lot of prairie dog colonies that can be found. There's not a lot of fish resources, things like that. So in general, they are resource hungry. And looking over here, this is just showing the number of nests that we had for each of these classifications, with fish river being kind of the dominant classification that we found. And so here's a map that shows all 87 nests. So this is the same area as we saw in the very first map, without all the boxes, but it shows all these nest locations and how they've been grouped according to that classification system. And here, the white that you're seeing are representing quarry ponds, and you can see the classifications here and how they are mapped out all over the map. So besides the nest, though, what are the different stream colors showing us? So from our field studies, we know that not every stream is going to contain fish or be a reliable prey source for bald eagles. So that being said, we classified 5 different stream types based on characteristics, including sinuosity, drainage, as well as field observations and other reports. And based on these data, we were able to separate streams in those that bald eagles are likely to fish in, which we found were types 3 through 5, and those that were little meaningful fishing occurred, which are types 1 and 2. So this type 3 right in here in the yellow, this purple is a type 4, and then this larger blue is a type 5, and this is the South Platte River. Also based on this system, though, we also have a good basis on classifying an upland nest territory, which we define as being distal to higher discharge type 2 through 5 streams. So this is just to give an example of how we use those classification schemes in a real world example with our nests. And so here we're looking at adult territorial presence, and we're looking at it in a lens of areas that are resource limited as opposed to areas that are resource rich. So right off the bat, you can see those that are in the resource limited areas, you're seeing on average about an adult present about 50% of the time, as opposed to what you're seeing with any of these territories that are resource rich. On average, about 71.7% of the time, you'll see at least one adult present. There's a significant difference there, just based on resources alone. Those that are in resource rich areas, they don't have to travel as far to get what they need, so they can stick around their nest territories for more of the time. So finally, my last section, I am going to touch on bald eagle populations as it relates to the ever-growing northern Colorado Front Range. So here's just one of quite a few news articles that we've seen in the last year or so with very similar headline. Colorado's bald eagle population is booming in urban areas, and the state is trying to figure out why. So looking back at this slide again, as we mentioned before, 5 of the fastest growing counties in Colorado fall within our study area. And as we continue to witness, new development continues to encroach within short distances of our bald eagle's nest. So I want to look at that a little more closely. So we conducted a resource selection analysis study to quantify the amount of human development in areas around 68 nests. And we used vector building footprint data as our best analog for human development, and then calculated the building density within a standard management buffer, or pretty much the circle or the area of a circle that has a quarter-mile radius. The first order of business was to see if the business density at a quarter-mile radius of all the nests had any preference or really any big difference when compared to a population of 1,000 randomly generated nests. So again, these are our 68 nests, and these are the random. This is representing the random nests. And these random nests mean basically the nesting eagles could nest anywhere that they chose, but to be more realistic, because we know that's not going to happen in the Front Range, we created a rule that the random nest could not be isolated or located in meters or in a 30 by 30 meter pixel area where building density exceeded 25%. So as shown on this slide here, the comparative results were very clear. When comparing the building density of our 68 real nests on the left to the 1,000 random nests on the right, you can see a very significant difference in the results right off the bat. And looking at this again, the X is representing the average. But keep in mind, looking at this, the scale of the building density on the vertical axis is exponential, and it's in square meters. But as you can see, just by looking at the averages, the actual 68 nests had building density of 1,344 meters squared, versus an average density of 16,918 meters squared in the random areas. So the random nest density is 13 times greater than the average of these real nests, which is quite a bit, quite a bit of a difference there. But this tells us that our eagles are generally choosing areas that are less populated and with less human interference. And here we take a closer look at the number of the 68 nests. So, which is, what you're seeing here, the numbers of nests on the vertical axis. As shown in the very tall black bar here, 63% of our 68 nests are in areas with a building density of less than 800 meters squared. And to kind of give a frame of reference for that, that pretty much approximates to an area of about 3 to 4 medium-sized residential homes. So in a relatively large circular area with a quarter-mile radius, this is actually a very low building density. And in fact, as you can see on the graph, only about 12% of nests have building densities that exceed even one standard deviation above the mean at 3,767 meters squared. So here we're giving you an example of what building density looks like at a quarter mile with a quarter-mile radius for those 63 nests. So this is what it looks like. This is an example with 735 meters squared building density. So the density is very low, as you can see here. When we, so this is giving an example of what the territories look like with the average building density, so a little bit closer to that 1344 value. The building density here is still pretty low, but it approximates what you typically see in rural ag settings, like you see in the Front Range. And just want to note, so it's kind of hard to see on this histogram, but you do see there is a natural break in the population between pretty much right here, about one standard deviation above the mean, and what lies beyond that. And again, that does represent 12% of those 68 nest territories. They are kind of a standout, but we suggest that those small percentages of nests, they may be home to territorial eagles that could be more urban adapted. So the data clearly shows that the majority of nests fall in areas with low building densities. And our conclusion based on this data is that territorial bald eagles in the northern Colorado Front Range, with a few exceptions, are choosing to nest in areas with low human interference. And as I noted before, with the explosion of growth in the northern Colorado Front Range, these large nesting territories and habitats will continue to be encroached upon, and protection will be a challenge. At this time, land managers and much of the public continue to focus on the northern Colorado Front Range population through a generalized lens meaning like of the national bald eagle population. But we hope tonight that we've shown you at least good supporting data that um, demonstrates that our population is unique, and we're seeing a lot of similarities to what you might find in drier states like Arizona. And with the strain on the resources and habitat related to the booming growth of the Front Range, we'd like to conserve the nests that we have here. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dana. He has a few slides that he would like to share as well. And then again, after he is finished, he can, or we can go ahead and take any questions that you might have. For that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dana.
Okay. Thanks, Holly. Nice job.
Thanks.
Holly, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. I can't, hold on, I can make it a little bit bigger. All right. So it's evening and I'm an add-on here and I'm going to rush through these things. And then we'll have questions as well. But so anyway, I'd like to wrap things up here by taking, just 10 minutes. I think I timed it at 10 or 11 minutes. So, and I want to tell you a couple of things that are at the top of my list in the terms of advocacy and concerns that I have. And I'm going to start right in with the post-fledged dependence period, or the PFD period as used going forward. And what we've learned from studies, as Holly mentioned, on 27 juvenile fledglings at 5 different nests. But first to my concern, all nesting raptors here in Colorado are currently, or at least effectively, unprotected during this critical period of post-fledgling dependence. So there we go. So what is the PFD period, post-fledged dependence period, and why is it important? So after the first flights, or fledge is what it's referred to, juvenile bald eagles remain dependent upon parental care for several months during a time referred to as the PFD, or the post-fledging dependence period. And like I said, I'll use that acronym going forward. And during this period, fledglings acquire sufficient food reserves for long distance travel. They improve developing flight skills, and some towards the very late stages of the PFD period can develop nascent hunting skills, or at least try them out. Greater than 80% of food is provided by their parents, so skills and development occur without the added pressures of these juveniles having to secure food. Overall fitness acquired during PFD affects survival after dispersal, and survival is the most difficult in the first year after PFD, after they disperse from their parents' territory. So these are 2 fledglings that have been joined by their dad, not too far from the nest tree during the 2021 PFD period at the Stearns nest. And he had just, before this photo, he just delivered some fish to them. They've been out flying for a few weeks. And here are the results from our PFD prey acquisition studies. In blue on the pie chart, you can see that greater than 80% of prey during PFD is provided by the parents, and less than 10% is captured by juveniles. So when is the PFD period? Not to get into too many details here, but it's the time frame in yellow, and it ranges from about mid-June through early September for our nest. These are 5 nests that we study. The other time periods are nest building and courtship, which are in green, incubation in gray, and hatch to fledge in blue. So here are the basic stages during PFD based on our studies of these same 27 juveniles. Now, the ranges, the scale ranges go from 0 to 7 weeks, or 0 to 11 weeks. From here, 0 to 11 weeks after fledge. And as you can see up here, the juveniles move out of their parents' territory or disperse at an average time of 45 days after they fledge. This bar here is the minimum to the maximum time of most nests during the PFD period, although we have a couple outliers over here. In the first week after these guys fledge, they spend an average of greater than 70% of their time in the nest tree. And then in the first 2 weeks, we record their behavior characteristic of what we call EFSD, that's early flight skill to behavior. Basically, it means they're pretty uncoordinated during this first 2 weeks. And they have difficulties, not all, some are pretty athletic right off the bat, but most of them are pretty uncoordinated in their landings, in their takeoff, and some other things. And this period averages about 14 days based on 23 fledglings we had good data on. Then the next stage that occurs is soaring, which for 21 that we had good data on, averaged 18 days after fledge. And the soaring continues until they disperse. And then the other piece of information that's of interest here is hunting attempts. Over a 5 or 6 year period of time, we only documented 13 hunting attempts by these juveniles with only, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 successful attempts. So again, most of the prey is provided by their parents. And these hunting attempts on average occur at 80% or more of the PFD length. So basically, they're not starting to get out there and even think about hunting until almost right before they leave the nest area. And the thing about soaring that I didn't mention is some really good studies out there indicate that soaring will begin after juveniles start to gain requisite fitness and flight skills. And a lot of times, so it is delayed to this extent after 0, after fledge, just to gain that level of fitness and skills. Here's a few photographs that I took just to give a sense of some of this. Actually, this is just prior to fledge. I love this stage. In some of our winds here, if they're not too strong, just before this juvenile actually started to fly, he flew, but not really. He just used the wind to lift him off the nest. And there's his mom checking him out. It was really fun to watch. Early flight stages. This was 2019 at Stearns. 2 juveniles there, early flight stage. They very, very few flights during that before soaring begins. This is the early flight skill behaviors, or the kind of uncoordinated stage. Here's 2 siblings here, one running into the other one as they're landing. It's a pretty common thing to see. Soaring begins. What a wonderful thing to watch, especially when they have siblings. And this is at the Erie nest. And then here's a glimpse of territorial usage from data usage during the post-fledge dependence period, what we call the Erie nest in 2018. The green dots are all the perches that the 3 juveniles used during that PFD season. And the pink or the solid pink circles designate proportional time that these juveniles spent at each of these green perches over the PFD period. The big pink circle, it's the half-mile radius kind of typical management buffer. And one of the takeaways here is, they were using this area over here late in PFD. They're using a fairly substantial area, especially when looking at this half-mile buffer here. The other piece to leave you with, and it's pretty common throughout the Front Range, is these yellow areas in here. This has been developed. These guys first started nesting over here. The nest was taken down by a legal permit. And these birds moved over to here. The nest fell and they moved to here. Since then, this subdivision developed. This thing's being developed. This is slated for development, and so is this. And this is owned by Occidental. I'm figuring that will probably be developed as well. Kind of a scenario that's going on in the Front Range that a lot of people are thinking about. So as I mentioned at the start, the PFD nesting period is still not recognized for protection in Colorado. And here's a couple of examples. In terms of oil and gas regulatory management, here's a quote from an email that I had gotten with some permitting information on it. In quotes, the eagle nest buffer window can be shortened if the nest has been confirmed to have fledged by CPW or Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Meaning once the juveniles fledge, the minute they leave the nest, development can come in at any, in some places at any distance from the nest. Or in a paper we recently submitted for journal submission, here's a peer reviewer. Here was his comment, or his or her comment, I can't remember. You should also mention that the young did fledge from all of the nests, and therefore the perch displacement may not significantly affect nesting success. In terms of oil and gas development, this opens up an area close to the nest during the PFD period immediately upon fledge. And here's an example of exactly that in 2019, at only a quarter mile from the nest at the very start of the PFD period. And here you can see an array of oil and gas equipment in one of the most important fishing areas for these territorial eagles. This development lasted until the very end of the PFD period. And what about the notion from the reviewer that displacement doesn't matter as a nest is considered successful if the young have fledged? Well, this graph is of provisioning rates from 8 nests from our studies, shows adult provisioning to juveniles. So let me explain really quickly. So provisioning rates is what the adults bring, the prey that they bring into to the juveniles. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 nests here. And what we're describing in these graphs is provisioning per hour on this scale, and then provisioning per hour over 3 time periods. One time period in black is hatch to fledge. The brown is the PFD period that we've been talking about. And then the gray is the total time period. And as you can see, these 3 are pretty regular throughout these 7 nests. Well, that's what happened here at the Boulder Creek nest during the start of the PFD period when the construction happened and through the PFD period. Well, the provisioning rates were super, super low. And that's a concern, and that's something that a lot of people aren't thinking about. I'm going to end here with some support of the Stearns Eagles that is needed from from our community. I'm going to go back to what Holly mentioned at the Stearns nest, and here's this cutoff trail. Here's the area that those birds have been shown to be displaced from. And the next slide again, just to reiterate, these three show the male and female before the cutoff trail was opened. And then this is the area that they stopped, this is where they stopped using the perches of the cutoff trail. And our feeling is that this is an 800-meter long trail. It's not a requisite trail for humans to get to work or where they need to go. There's good access in different ways. With this trail 80 meters from the nest and displacing the birds like this, we would ask the community for some help and support in asking for this trail to be closed permanently. Next thing at Stearns, and what we know to be a concern, this is the nest in 2021. Here's this dead limb, one of the supporting branches that I've worried about for quite a while. One of our volunteers, Anita, took these, I think both these photos. We were gone in Florida. She sent me this photo. I was like, oh my God, that's this branch here that's now dangling. And this nest is starting to sag. And this is what can happen. This is one of the concerns that we have. We knew that this was going to be an issue. We offered to, as has been done, at Bar Lake, there's been nest platforms that have been built. At Fort St. Vrain, there has been a nest that's been rebuilt there and camera work and whatever. And so we offered just, at a slack time to come in and support this nest at Stearns. The response that we got from Boulder County Parks and Open Space was that they don't support artificial interventions, such as installing artificial nests or shoring up nests, believing that eagles know best where to site their nest. Well, let's go back to what Holly was talking about. This is the study that we did on old growth cottonwoods at the Stearns nest area, where we characterized all the mid to old growth cottonwoods in the whole area. One, you can see there's very few trees. Number two, they're mostly unsuitable. There's an issue here in terms of nest trees. And this is a graph that shows from 2013 to 20, 15 nest moves that we documented through that period of time. Mostly the nest fell, the tree fell, there was some construction work or whatever, they abandoned the nest, they went somewhere else. Where did they go out of these 15 moves? An average of a little bit of a kilometer from the nest. Charles Broley was kind of the original studier of migration of bald eagles in the Florida area. He knew it way back then. He said, eagles show a very strong attachment to a chosen territory. When a pair lose their nest or desert it after a disaster, they nearly always choose a tree close by for their new nest. Frequently, I've seen eagles, rather than leave a territory, take a nest quite unsuited for their purpose, et cetera, et cetera. And the point is, at this site, eagles know where best to site their nests. These bald eagles have been interfered with many times, and they used to nest over here and were displaced. Nest trees are a problem. They don't go very far. That's just the way they are. And these raptors are our local treasure. And, help us to make the few changes needed to keep them well. So thank you for joining us tonight. If you're interested in volunteering or you have additional questions, well, I'll be here now and to answer them. And here's our email address. You can get a hold of us there. And thank you so much for coming. And thank you for taking the extra time here to, let me shove it now. It's been about 13 minutes or so. And so we'll open it up to questions then. Holly, do you need to do that?
I don't think so. I think anybody can unmute themselves if they have a question. But I did see that somebody just raised their hand. So maybe if you want to chime in, if there's a lot of you, maybe raise your hand and unmute yourself so we can kind of see the order.
Holly, why don't I let you take care of that? And I'll answer the questions, but maybe you can help sort through them.
Okay. Well, this question from Emma, she wants to know what kind of volunteer roles do we need right now?
Holly, go
Can you
ahead.
hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Let her know.
Okay. So Emma wrote in the chat, she wants to know what kind of volunteer roles we need right now.
Oh, Holly, you can answer that.
All right. So we do have several nests in these field areas that I mentioned before that we do have volunteers going out into the field and doing the observations. And so, really any of those nest sites, throughout, we do go out to these sites ideally during 3 different time periods, as often as we can. So usually a morning shift, kind of an afternoon shift, and then like an early evening kind of sunset shift. So, if we can have more people out there, it's nice because we can kind of spread out the time a little bit more evenly. But yeah, most of that, what we're probably looking for is just a few folks to kind of fill in at those nests. Particularly the five, a lot, most of the 5 PFD nests that Dana mentioned is where we do most of those field studies.
Thank you. I appreciate the information.
Yeah, and you can always send us an email and we can kind of touch base and see, what territory would probably be the best fit for you. Another question we have, do we collaborate with the Rocky Mountain Bird Conservancy Bald Eagle Watch program?
Sure, I'll get that.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I was hoping Matt Smith was here, but I'm not sure. And yes, we do. And we've also, been doing a little bit of back and forth and sharing some information as well. And actually we'll have one co-authored paper with one of our friends at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Risa Conry. So yes, we do.
And then Mike has 2 questions. First, are we seeing new generations of mature cottonwoods to replace the aging trees we're losing? And then his second question is lots of talk about beaver reintroduction to restore ecosystems across Colorado and the West. So how do bald eagles do near active beaver colonies or lodges?
I don't know anything about, I don't know anything about, I mean, so we'd be talking about beaver colonies, so we'd be talking about up in the mountains, so kind of mountain nest. And I don't really have any information or any light to shed on that one in terms of, I mean, there are cottonwoods that are growing, but in places for sure, smaller ones. They grow to about, they live to about 150 years. And we're looking, the old growth ones now are probably 110, 120 years old. And they tend to be in stands of kind of equal age. No reason to get into that right now. And I'm sorry, I don't have any information on the beaver related question. Do you?
I don't really know a whole lot about that, to be honest, either.
And this was Mike, you said, that asked this?
Yes.
Mike,
Yeah,
do you know?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Real quick, there's a study that was commissioned by Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks, and I'll forward it to you. They're targeting Coal Creek and South Boulder Creek and Boulder Valley as 2 potential beaver recovery areas.
Is it so? Coal Creek, is that in the mountains or down here, Mike?
It sounded to me like it's down here. I haven't looked carefully through the study, but for South Boulder Creek, we were looking at it for potential in terms of flood restoration and just a healthier overall ecosystem. And there's a few, I think, in the valley, and I used to think more in the mountains, but I think the habitat naturally ranged in the plains too, and I think there's potential down low.
Well, send me that. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, sure will. Thank you. Great program.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, I know in Erie, there's a number of trees cut down by beaver. I haven't ever seen the beaver. I've just seen the trees they've cut down.
Where's that? Donna, right?
Yeah, it's Donna.
Donna, where?
Right.
On,
Right on the Coal Creek, near the town,
oh, really?
It's east,
Near the old Parkton.
it's east of Erie as you go along Coal Creek Trail. There's some
Uh-huh.
signs that say there are beaver here.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
well, I mean, you can see the trees down.
I know. I've looked for
Yeah.
the beavers, but all I've seen is the signs.
Yeah, cool.
Who next? Holly, you get the next one.
All right, so John mentions a question about the trail closures at Stearns. So it seems like the main trail that goes along the dam is very close to the nest and would have an impact on the nesting eagles. Your thoughts? Goes along the dam, it's very close.
That's a tough one. And these guys are tricky. These birds are tricky because, bald eagles, probably more so than some other raptors, they definitely are plastic and they definitely can habituate to things. But one of the things about them is that things that they're not familiar with, or something, you wear a blue hat versus a red hat or whatever, that could set them off. And Holly showed this slide, which is kind of interesting, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, at the beginning of our study of the flush reactions of the CR16 nest. Well, those birds are inconsolable when people are within a third or a half mile of them. But to emphasize how varying that can be from nest to nest, the male of that nest shares the female at another nest. They're a polygamous triad 2 miles away. And when he's at the other nest, there's a little 2-track that goes up to a house that's near the nest there. He's largely unfazed by people around there. And then on the other hand, at this other nest site, he's insane at a third or even up to, towards a half a mile. So it's really hard to predict. And yes, I'm concerned about that area up by the berm. I'm glad that they put the keep moving signs. Well, I hope they put them back up, but I'm more concerned about that cutoff trail. They're never going to close the berm trail, and that's just the way it's going to be. And I think those eagles can live with it. We do know that they get displaced on the cutoff trail. Right now, the Boulder County commissioners are, they feel that, we've gotten the word from the wildlife managers. They say it's fine. We've done studies that show that it's not fine. And we need support from the community. That if we put a petition out for you folks, if we send it, we'd hope you might sign it and let them know this is a small ask for these birds. Those two, they're as good as it gets. Next, Holly.
All right, so is CPW of the mindset that the eagles have returned from the brink and are no longer endangered in Colorado, so active protections aren't needed? And what is the most effective way to advocate for these front range eagles as the front range continues to develop at a brisk pace? And that was from Becky.
Oh man, that's a complicated question. And CPW is made up of a lot of different people. And so, when the question is, what does CPW think? I don't know how to answer that, because probably everybody at CPW, there's probably a management philosophy there, and there's a lot of individuals and scientists and whatever. And I think depending upon who you speak to, you may get a bit of a different answer. So I'm going to kind of avoid that question. But I think one of the things that we were trying to convey is a lot of land managers, whether we deal with oil and gas, with the COGCC, or other land managers or communities and land managers with counties and cities and whatever, there is kind of a generalized mindset and perspective. And I think, as Holly was saying, there tends to be a frame of reference of bald eagles kind of from that national perspective of, well, they're booming, and what's the issue? You know, people hear stories of Alaska, Chesapeake, whatever, where they're like flies, supposedly, and they kind of overlay that scenario here. And as I think Holly showed very well from our data, this is not like those other populations. This is much like, some of the other drier populations like Arizona. And we have a lot fewer resources here, and we are really getting hammered with development. What can people do about that? On a simple level, if you live in Boulder County, get in touch with us and support us just with our local eagles, and sign a petition, write to the commissioners, say, close this trail, keep that riparian area from being interfered with, or, work with us to go back to Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the COGCC and say, hey, how we need to recognize this critical period, not just for bald eagles and post-sledge dependence, for golden eagles, every raptor. None of the raptors have protections, under the recommendations right now by CPW. They all quit at fledge. So, we want to work on that one as well, to have rules implemented under State Bill 181. Again, there's still room there for protections under the PFD period, and we're going to work to do that. Next, Holly.
So Peter wants to know if this data has been shared with the Boulder County Parks and Open Space and CPW.
Many times.
Simple as that. One of the recent submissions that we had submitted for on the encroachment that we saw at Stearns Lake, we did bring it to their attention, but that was also one of the documents that we did bring forward for journal submission.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a pleasure to share this with you. I mean, that's, as Holly said at the beginning, that's what we got into. I mean, I worked for the USGS through a career. That's what I did. It was doing research and sharing our data with others to, enlighten, inform, whatever. And that was, that's still the primary goal of our organization. So we really, we love sharing the information that we have. And yes, we have shared it with those entities, and we'll continue to try to do that.
So Nassim, hopefully I said that right, and Mike want to know, where do the juveniles go after they fledge?
That's a great question. And RISA and CPW, and I don't know if Jim's here or not, but RISA from CPW is part of this great study where they're mostly putting satellite tags on adults, these territorial adults, but they have tagged, I think now 4 juveniles, and have followed them after they fledge. And Risa's got some great information on that she has shared at the Fort St. Vrain Facebook group and some other areas. So for the Colorado fledglings that she has kept track of, there's good information there. I think some of the great analogs, for our area, we go to Decorah and some of the work that Raptor Resource Project has done, Brett Madernack, John Howe, et cetera. We gain a lot of data from a number of the fledglings that they've tagged there, and they do some long distance travel. But all these, juveniles, after they leave, they all have different flight paths, and some are really long and regular, some are, long and not regular, some are short. It's very, very different. It's very complicated, but there's some great data on that. Raptor Resource Project would be a great place to go to, because they have some information on their site that Brett has put out there on the eagles that they've tagged. He shared some of that information with us that we're going to use in our post-fledged manuscript, and Risa has done as well.
Okay, so Bruce wants to know what the fiction part of the study is.
Well, the fiction, the fiction part would be that that the birds here are alike. One of the photographs that I like to use in my presentations is from a guy on a boat with about 100 bald eagles around him with fish on the floor. And that tends to be part of the fiction, I think, when we talk to audiences in terms of the way people view bald eagles throughout the United States is kind of in this standard way as a lot of them, and all being, the populations being quite the same. So that would be one measure of fiction. I think another part of the fiction would be that once a juvenile fledges, that nest is successful. I think we've gone to show that that's not really the case, is that there's a lot of factors that get that bird out there to a point where it might be able to survive its first year. And if you're not protecting that territory where that bird is being supplied by its parents through that PFD period, to gain all of those skills to get the fitness that it needs, that birds could be in trouble. And that's another part, a couple examples of the fiction.
All right. So Neil asked, are the beaver recovery groups considering the impacts on the eagles? I don't know that we can really answer that at this time. But that could be something we could look into.
Well, maybe I understand that. What recovery groups?
The beaver recovery groups.
Oh, yeah. No, I can't. I don't have any input on that one either, Holly.
All right. So Moose asked, do you know why a lot of the prairie dog colonies that used to be in Boulder County near active eagle nests have been removed this past year?
That is a revolving plate or a revolving door. That one changes a lot. And when we did this 87 nest study and we mapped prairie dog colonies at these 87 nest sites in many different, in a number of different counties and different areas, what we saw, what really kind of amazed me, is that you could kind of tell what the prairie dog policy was in some of these different areas. It was very, very clear. I have to say, although, kind of in the area that we study, not including Weld County, in Boulder County, there's a lot more tolerance here for prairie dogs. But as we know, it's a pretty controversial issue, and not everybody sees and has the great esteem that I have for prairie dogs, and that the raptors and other predators have for prairie dogs. So it's a complicated story, and I don't know what more to say on that one.
Okay. Okay. All right, and I just want to share some of the comments I've seen in the chat too. So Lisa did mention, so we at this Fort St. Vrain nest clearly saw the complete disregard for the post-fledged dispersal time frame the past season. Was SV 46 was still in the nest a good amount of time when the construction started, just a few feet from the nest. So that's important to know. On camera, you can clearly see the effect it was having. And also,
can I say something about that, Holly, really quick? Is that I have always thought that some of these Facebook groups that follow these cameras, I've always felt like it offers a really nice resource for people. And I also felt like in terms of offering protections for, these eagles that we care about, that has always seemed like an underutilized source of support for these birds. And now that's not a critique, it's just saying that there's power there. And so I still feel like, in terms of this post-fledged dependence protection, there's a lot of voices like it, that Fort St. Vrain camera group, that could be not crazy advocates, but just supportive, kind advocates for these birds. And so I think that, I just wanted to put that one out there. There could be some help there. Next one, Holly.
So Sherry said, please reflect on the increase of the osprey population on bald eagles.
That's an interesting one. At one of the nests that we study, we have been watching more osprey. There used to be one osprey nest out of the Boulder Creek nest. That's back in 2014, 15. I don't know. Bruce would know if you're still there, Bruce. I think there was one, maybe two. Now I think there's four.
Yeah.
And is that right, Donna?
Yeah, there's 4 there now.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
somebody came and took down one of them because, 2 of them are on utility pole things, and the one on D is all gone. And I don't think
we'll talk about that. I don't know the impact of osprey. I mean, they fight, and I do sometimes wonder about, the encroachment of more osprey, like on those Boulder Creek eagles. That's the one nest where the thought has come to me. Other than that area, there's only one other nest that we study where there are osprey. That's one that comes to mind. I don't have much more to add on that.
Okay. So John wants to know, will the meeting recording be available after this meeting?
Yes, not immediately after, but it is being recorded, and other people have asked that couldn't attend. And Holly, you're going to have to help me figure out how to make that available to people.
Yeah. And then Bev mentioned, so regarding interactions with other bald eagles and other raptor species, do your graphs largely reflect the abundance of those species in a nest area? Said, for instance, ferruginous hawks represent a small fraction of bald eagle interactions, but if you looked at it from the ferruginous hawk standpoint, it may be that the small numbers of wintering ferruginous hawks would show a large proportion of interactions with bald eagles.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about that as well. I was like, somebody's going to say, oh, well, that doesn't represent the whole, the whole picture. And you're right. There is, our frame of reference has been taken mostly from within nesting territories. However, the nest, in terms of ferruginous hawks, some of the areas that we study, like the hygiene nest or out at Rabbit Mountain, just to the north of the hygiene nest, or even at Stearns Lake, there's many ferruginous hawks that come around as anywhere else that I see. That's the best that I can answer that. I see bald eagles steal food from everybody. And then I go see golden eagles steal food from the bald eagles and then from the ferruginous hawks. I was with Mia. I think we were watching a ferruginous hawk come down and knock the prey out of a flying bald eagle and go down and grab it. So all I could say about the ferruginous hawks is that we have 4 territories where they live and stay one of them stays within bald eagle's territory.
All right, so Becky chimed in. So bald eagles on the Front Range seem to have a preference for building nests in cottonwoods, and often these trees are aging and these branches collapse. Many HOAs and communities will not allow cottonwoods to be replaced or planted. So do you feel the eagles will adapt as the cottonwoods disappear, or will they move elsewhere to find the cottonwoods?
Here's my thought on that. I have this feeling that after I die, that probably the bald eagle nesting population will still have a bald eagle nesting population, but there'll be places like around, like around Hygiene, St. Vrain, around some of the creek areas where there's some nice, there are old growth cottonwoods. And there are alternatives and what have you. I think those are the areas, where there will be nests, but there's going to be a lot of places where there won't be, especially with a lot of human development. There's not going to be much alternative nest trees in areas. So I don't know. I don't know what will happen, but I do think that through time, the nest areas are going to be much, much more limited.
All right, and then Sherry asked, in the Levelland area this year, 2 bald eagles unsuccessfully tried to nest in heron rookeries. Is this happening in other areas?
Well, the CR16 nest, I believe there was a heron rookery there. And then there was the water treatment plant. As they built that, they drove all the herons. Herons are pretty sensitive. And so they drove all the herons out of that rookery. And I do know that CR16 eagles built their nest on top of a heron nest, but those have been abandoned. I do know that there's been some concerns, in Boulder County land, of bald eagles taking over, heron nest. But I don't know much more than that.
All right, and then Emma asked, so I saw something about a bionic arm used by the Raptor Resource Project fixing a nest at the Fort St. Vrain nest. Is this something that could be used?
Sure. John Howe put up that bionic arm, and it was just a crotch support for the nest. And it was a really great design. And the eagles were fine. They didn't go anywhere. They came back, they nested there. And like I said, CPW has put up, kind of basic basket platforms for, after the nests have gone down there. It's not a novel idea. In Boulder County, there are osprey nests and osprey platforms. I'm not sure how one could say that we don't support nest platforms or whatever, but yeah, it would be a simple procedure to go up at the right time of year and put a buttress support, underneath the Stearns nest. And my concern is that if that nest goes down, it's going to take some of the other supporting branches with it. And there's really only one other tree out there that we know that they could possibly nest in, but it's way, way too dense up at the top. They'd have to, for those birds to use it, somebody would have to get in and cut a few branches away. And again, that's not something that they're going to do. But yeah, the arm that John built, that, I mean, it wouldn't need to be something that complex. It would just be a support. It could be done really quickly and cheaply.
Okay, and then Anna asked, so what would you like your call to action be for those watching this presentation?
Oh, that's a good one. Call to action would be, make sure your name's on that sign up list, or send us your email. We won't bother you. We're just too busy to be sending out lots of newsletters and info like that. But sometimes, we would like to go back to the bullets. For example, 2 things I could think of. we'd like to go back to the Boulder County Commissioners with a lot of support, just to say, this is a minimal thing. Please, it's an 800-meter trail. It's not a requisite trail. Please close the trail. Number two, let us support this nest. These guys deserve it. And then maybe the third thing, again, make sure that we have your contact information. If we need support, to go back to CPW and their commission, to say, hey, please, here's the reason we'd like you to change your recommendation language, calling for protections throughout the PFD period. We could also use your names and your voices and your signatures for support there as well. And volunteer if you'd like. We love you too.
So we have one more question here from Emma in the chat, and first she said thank you for the information on the nest support. Also, how should we ensure that we are respecting nesting territories if we are hiking in the vicinity of them?
Well, the trail was open at Stearns Lake on August 6th that allowed people within, to bisect their territory. I don't go on that trail. I just choose not to. So I would just say, I think CPW has some great recommendations in terms of distances to stay away from nesting raptors. And I think I would go to the 2020 CPW recommendations to take a look at for different raptors. What do they recommend? So for bald eagles, it's, no surface occupancy, quarter mile, half mile, dependent upon the time frame of, the time of year. I personally, I've seen bald eagles, it depends, they flush kind of 200, 250, sometimes 300 meters, sometimes more from a nest, or from a perch. So I keep my distance myself. So I just personally, like at Stearns, I just wouldn't go on that trail.
All right. So, let's see here. Yeah, just want to chime in a message from Becky. We don't have any more questions at this time, but she said, thank you for our work and advocacy for these beautiful and majestic raptors on the Front Range. We need to recognize their value to our area and need to protect them now and in the future. A good note to throw in there. And Risa just chimed in with some of the CPW buffer recommendations that Dana just mentioned. So if you wanted to check those out, you can click on the link that Risa just put in the chat. But all that, so we kind of done with the questions at this point in the chat. Does anybody have any any final questions before we close out for the night?
I was just gonna say, maybe you could send out some of the links in an email, because it's be easier to get to than to try to find them in the chat.
That is a great idea.
Okay, you mean like the one that Risa sent?
Yeah, and then Risa, you said she also did some studies about them flying around where they flew to. If there's a link for that, that'd be interesting.
Risa, where can they find those cool maps and stuff that you did?
So some of them have been posted to Twitter and Facebook, and those did get, the ones on the Fort St. Vrain juvenile that we tagged in 2021 were reposted on that Facebook page. So it might be possible to search for them in Facebook, or maybe just doing a Google search for those. Since the research is still in progress, and we've actually only tagged 5 juveniles, like Dana said, most of our tagged birds our territorial adults. But since that's all still in progress, we haven't posted maps for all the birds, but that one was of special interest just because there's a webcam on that nest. So you can find some of those maps, and actually I'm getting ready to post another one pretty soon for that bird who's a 1.5 years old now.
Risa, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so. I mean, unless there are other specific questions, but I don't want to take over your Zoom. I could talk for hours about.
We already have.
That's true.
All right. Well, I think we can probably go ahead and close out for the night. But again, thank you everybody for joining us and bringing such wonderful comments and great questions for us to answer. And again, we hope that you at least have some new enlightening information of how cool our population is in the Front Range. You know, and you know, keep track of what we're doing. Hopefully we'll send out some updates and things like that in the future.
Thank you everyone for coming and sticking with us for, for a longer meeting. I appreciate it too. Thank you.
All right. Well, everybody have a great night. And we'll maybe hear from us soon. And we'll send out that recording eventually, probably not right away, and hopefully get some links to you guys as well. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.